Good day, welcome to Learn Extra Exam Revision. Today we are going to discuss the Economics Paper 1 and how you should prepare for this paper for the exam. Let's look at the checklist first. Very important that you know the structure of the paper. You must know what to expect when you go into that exam room. Paper 1 covers the following topics: macroeconomics and economic pursuits, and I've written down a list of the topics that you can see under each one of these headings. Macroeconomics, we discuss circular flow, business cycles, the public sector, foreign exchange markets, protectionism and free trade. And under economic pursuits, we cover growth and development, industrial development policies, economic concepts and social performance indicators. The next step would be to look at the layout of the paper. Now the information that we're going to discuss now goes for paper 1 and paper 2. So when we have a discussion on paper 2, you will see that the layout of the paper is exactly the same. Each one of the papers consists of a total of 150 marks. You have 1.5 hours to complete the paper. And it is therefore very important that you pay attention to the time allocation for each one of the questions. As you can see, the question paper is divided into 3 sections. Section A consists of only one question, which is short questions like multiple choice, true and false, match the column type of questions. And then you will have a few options when you go to section B. Section B consists of 3 questions, numbered as question 2 to 4, and from this section you only answer 2 questions. Section C consists of 2 essays, and you choose one of these essays. I want us to look at a few examples of exam questions so that you can get an idea of what to expect in this paper. As I already said, section A is compulsory. It's a total of 30 marks, so you should not spend more than around about 15 minutes to complete this section. Let's look at question 1.1. It is extremely important that you read all the instructions that are given and that you carry out those instructions. 1.1, various possible options are provided as answers to the following questions. Write only the letter A to C next to the question number. Then 1.1.1, business cycle diagrams are drawn in the shape of, and if you have seen a picture of what a business cycle looks like, it represents a wave. So the answer would be B, and in your answer book, you will write the number B. 1.1.2, the systematic record of all the transactions of a country's inhabitants with the rest of the world is known as the answer here is the balance of payment. Once again, in your answer book, the only thing that you write down is the letter C. 1.1.3, during an economic recession, unemployment will increase, production increases, spending increases. Now, if you know anything about a recession, this is a period of time during which there's a decrease in economic activity. So there cannot be an increase in production, and when there's a decrease in economic activity, people's incomes will also decrease. So the correct answer would be A. 1.1.4, the new economic paradigm is embedded in the demand side policies. The answer is A. 1.1.5, according to the United Nations classifications, South Africa's HDI ranking is categorized as a middle level. South Africa's economy is classified as a dualistic economy because we have elements of both a developed and a developing country. Let's move on to question 1.2. Choose a description from column B that matches an item in column A. Write only the letter A to I next to the question number. Let's look at the different options available. Column A, 1.2.1 residual item, 2 real flow, 3 GNI, 4 tariffs, 5 trough, 6 depression, 7 GDP, 8 GNP. When I look at the options in column B, A, balancing figure in the calculation of the gross domestic product, B, the lowest turning point, C, marginal revenue received, D, production by the citizens, E, rates paid to discourage imports, F, the economy in a recession for 2 consecutive quarters, G, the flow of goods and services, H, production inside the borders, and I, the total income of the citizens. When I look at 1.2.1, the residual item, I think it's clear that the answer is A. That is something that you find in the balance of payment to try and balance out possible differences in the calculation. So 1.2.1 A. And it's a good idea to eliminate the ones that you have used. 1.2.2, the real flow, comes from the circular flow of economic activities, and it refers to the flow of goods and services. G would be the correct answer. 1.2.3, gross national income. That refers to the income of the citizens of a country. That's what the N refers to. So the answer would be I. 1.2.4, tariffs. You would pay a tariff if someone wants to discourage you from using a good or service or to import a good or service. So when I look at the options here, the answer would be E. 1.2.5, a trough is the lowest turning point on the business cycle. From the options, it's clear that B would be the answer. 1.2.6, a depression. A depression is something that occurs after a period of a recession, so the answer would be F. 1.2.7, the GDP, the key letter here would be the D. It refers to the production inside the borders of a country, and the answer would be H. Then 1.2.8, GNP is production by the citizens of a country for a specific period of time, and that would be D. Question 1.3. Give one word or term for each of the following descriptions. Write only the correct word or term next to the question number. It is very important that you follow the instructions and not rewrite the whole sentence, because it makes it very difficult for the person who needs to mark your paper. 1.3.1, the group of economists that believe that the markets are inherently unstable. That would be the Keynesian economists. 1.3.2, a deliberate measure by the state to reduce the value of a currency. Now, if the currency or the value of the currency is determined by the demand or supply of a currency, then it would be known as depreciation or appreciation. The moment that the government intervenes, it would be known as devaluation. 1.3.3, the act that prohibits unfair discrimination in the workplace would be the Employment Equity Act. Please write out the full word when you answer in the exam. Let's look at question 1.3.4. Redistribution of income in South Africa is affected through this system. It is the system of employment equity. 1.3.5, trade and financial penalties applied by one or more countries to another country is known as sanctions. And then 1.3.6, monitors and liberalizes international trade. That is the World Trade Organization. And that brings us to the end of section A. Let's go into an ad break. Welcome back. Now we're going to discuss section B. Section B consists of 4 questions, and this is what you can expect your exam paper to look like. It starts with question 2, macroeconomics, for 40 marks, and you should spend around about 20 minutes on completing this question. Question 3 will be on economic pursuits, 40 marks, again another 20 minutes. And then question 4, macroeconomics and economic pursuits. So as you can see, it's a combination of the questions 2 and 3, 40 marks and another 20 minutes. You only answer 2 questions from this section, and then the total for section B would be 80 marks. Let's look at question 2. 2.1, answer the following questions. 2.1.1, define the concept balance of payments. It's very important that you look at the instruction, and the instruction says that you have to define, which means you have to write down a precise meaning. And the precise meaning for balance of payment would be, the balance of payments is a record of all the transactions between a country and the rest of the world. 2.1.2, list any 2 indicators underpinning forecasting in business cycles. Now there's a variety of answers. You only have to write 2 answers. The moment that you write more, the rest of your answers will be ignored. On the memo, I have included all the possible answers: leading indicators, lagging indicators, coincident indicators. You can look at the length of the business cycle, the amplitude, the trend, extrapolation, and moving averages. 2.2, study the extract and the graph below and answer the questions that follow. The important thing that we see in this graph is the trend. So you have to see that over a certain period of time there has been certain changes in economic activities. Economic activities has increased and it has decreased over a period of time. So to make any comment on this question, you have to have an idea of what's happening in the trend. The first question on this graph is actually only a definition. So again, pay attention to detail when you write your answer. Define the term exchange rate, and exchange rate is the price of one currency in terms of another. And there you see the definition. 2.2.2, explain the negative impact of strikes on the South African economy. To be able to answer this question, you just need to think about the things that you've heard in the news very recently and the effect that it has on the economy. Companies lose a lot of money. Some people even eventually lose their jobs. Let's look at all the possible answers. There's a loss of labor hours. There's a loss of production. As a result of that, there's a loss of income to the companies. There's a decrease in exports, especially if you think about the gold mines and all the gold that they are supposed to export that is not extracted during a specific period of time. This leads to a decrease in exports. And as a result of that, we have balance of payment problems, and then certain people also lose their jobs. 2.2.3, do you think South Africa attracted more direct foreign investment during April 2011? Motivate your answer. Let's look at the answer that we have here. The answer is no, and the reason for that, and you will have to go back to the graph to be able to see what is happening. As you can see how the value of the rand changes over a period of time. Looking at December 2011, in this area, there has been a depreciation in the value of the currency. And this brings us to the answer of 2.2.3. It says the exchange rate is not favorable or the rand is stronger, and therefore you get less value for your currency. 2.3, study the table below on the calculation of the gross domestic product and answer the questions that follow. And what you will see in this table is that certain information has been left out. I see there's an A, there's a B, and there's a C that you will at some stage have to complete. 2.3.1, which alternative term is used for the gross domestic product in the national accounts? The term that they use in the national accounts is the gross value added. Okay, let's move on to question 2.3.2. You have to provide labels for A and C. As I've indicated earlier, I've drawn circles around A and C. Gross value added at the first one, because it is in the production phase, it is known as factor cost. And you also had to provide a label for C, and C would be further in the production process where the product is actually sold to the consumer, they add taxes. That brings us to the answer for 2.3.2, and A would be factor cost, C would be taxes. Question 2.3.3, calculate the gross value added at basic prices, letter B. As we've seen on the table earlier on, that is B, and they are expecting you to calculate the gross value added at basic prices. To be able to calculate the gross value added at basic prices, you must look at the gross value added at factor cost plus taxes on production minus subsidies on production. Let's take the calculator and do the actual calculation. 2,980,013, and there's a problem there, so I'm going to press the button again. 2,980,013 plus 64,914 minus 14664, and the final answer would be 3030263. The important thing when you write the answer is that you indicate the answer in million rand. Question 2.4. Explain the Laffer curve with the aid of a graph. And what we see on this graph is on the vertical axis we see tax revenue. On the horizontal axis we see the tax rate. To give you a short explanation of what this basically means is that the government should try and find the point where they can maximize their income from taxation. If they are going to charge taxes that are too high, people are going to get to the point where they are going to refuse to work, or they won't work overtime because the taxation is too high. So if we move on this curve on the graph, you can see that taxation will increase up to point T. So the maximum level of taxation would be at point T. From here onwards, the government's revenue from taxes would decrease if they increase the tax rate. And when it gets to this point, no one would be willing to work because they would sacrifice all their income on taxes. Let's just look at one or 2 points. It's important to look at the mark allocation. The mark allocation is it's 8 marks for this question. So usually it would be around about 4 marks for the graph and only 4 marks for the explanation, which means that you can write probably about 2 facts on the topic. The Laffer curve shows the relationship between tax rates, and these would be your keywords, tax rate and tax revenue collected by the government. The curve shows that as taxes increase, this is important, the government revenue increases up to a certain point and indicate link your answer to your graph and the labels that you put on the graph. And then if the tax rate rises beyond T, for instance at T1, there will be a decline in the government revenue. I have included a few more facts that you can use in your answer. 2.5. Discuss privatization as a problem of public sector provisioning. Now, the public sector refers to all the services that are provided by the government. Usually the government would at some stage decide that they want to decrease their share that they have in the economy, because businesses that are run by private institutions are usually more profitable, and that is what the economy actually needs. They need businesses that are profitable, and businesses pay taxes. Public sector businesses don't pay taxes to the government. What would the problem be with public sector provisioning? Let's look at the answer here. You can start your answer by discussing privatization. In short, it refers to the transfer of functions and ownership of the public businesses, or from the public sector to the private sector. Privatization leads to higher prices, which excludes people from the consumption. So any person who's going to try and run a business would do that for the sake of making profit. So that would lead to an increase in prices. That's a good thing to mention in the answer. And then state-owned enterprises are sometimes bureaucratic, inefficient, and unresponsive to consumer needs, and therefore often a burden to the taxpayer. That brings us to the end of section B. Let's go for an ad break. Welcome back. We are now going to look at section C. Important thing that you have to remember about section C, this will cover 2 essays, an essay from each one of the main topics that you had to study. And this is what the instruction looks like. Answer any one of the 2 questions in this section in the answer book. Question 5 will always be on macroeconomics. It's a question for 40 marks, and the minutes that you should spend on it would be 35. Question 6 will cover economic pursuits, 40 marks, and don't spend more than 35 minutes on this question. At the start of each one of these essay questions, you will find a table that gives you a guideline on what exactly they expect you to do in the essay and how the marks will be allocated. And this is what the table looks like. It indicates the structure of the essay. Every essay should start with an introduction for a maximum of 2 marks, and this would usually be a definition or an explanation of the topic that the essay is about. The body is usually divided into 2 parts, the main part and the additional part, and they show you the mark allocation for that as well. The main part will usually be for 26 marks and the additional part for 10 marks. Now the main part will cover things like discuss, in detail, in-depth discussion, examine, critically discuss, analyze, compare, evaluate, distinguish, or explain, assess, or debate. That means that you must give a little bit more information than just naming the topic. So you will elaborate, you will explain in detail, and you will write examples where possible. In the additional part, it says give your own opinion, critically discuss, critically evaluate, draw a graph and explain, use the graph given and explain, complete the given graph, calculate, deduce, compare, explain, distinguish, or interpret, or briefly debate. That is usually an extension to the main part. So you have said certain things in the main part, and now you might explain that by making use of a graph, for instance. The last part would be the conclusion, maximum of 2 marks, and then the total for the essay would be 40 marks. That was the structure of the essay. Now I want us to look at one of the actual questions from section C. I've chosen to do question 6, which is on economic pursuits. The South African government is implementing both trade protectionism as well as free trade in an effort to grow the economy. Argue a case in favor of trade protectionism and for free trade. That is the main part of the question for 26 marks. And then the additional part of the question for 10 marks, explain if South Africa has been successful in promoting free trade. In your answer, refer to various protocols South Africa has entered into in support of free trade. Now, it's important that we actually look at some of the key words in the question. To start with, a case in favor of protectionism. So we must look at the pluses of trade protectionism, but also the pluses of free trade. So we are going to look at the reasons why industries in South Africa should be protected, but also reasons why we should have access to free trade. And in the second part, the additional part, we are going to look at, firstly, you have to answer the first part of the question. Has South Africa been successful in promoting free trade? That's the first part. And the second part of it, you have to look at certain trade protocols that South Africa has entered into. Don't forget to start the essay with the introduction. Now you have a variety of examples of introductions here. You only write 1 or 2 sentences that explains the concepts of free trade and protectionism, because as I said before, you can start your introduction with a definition. Let's look at some of the definitions that you might want to use. Free trade occurs when there is trade without any protectionist activities or trade barriers between countries. So you have mentioned that there is no interference by the government on trade between the countries. Or you could say businesses are free to import and export goods as well as to invest in foreign countries without the imposition of restrictive tariffs. That's another way in which you prevent trade or you restrict trade through making use of tariffs. And I'm going to look at one more. Protectionism involves a deliberate policy. In other words, it's something that the government has decided on. A deliberate policy by the government to create trade barriers such as, and you can give a few examples, tariffs and quotas. That means the quantity of a certain product that may be imported in a specific period of time in order to protect domestic industries. Remember, it's only for 2 marks, so don't write half a page. Right, then you move on to the body. Remember, the main part wanted you to look at the arguments for and against free trade. If you have to look at both of those aspects, I would take my marks and divide it between the 2 aspects. So if I'm going to look at arguments for trade protectionism, you have round about 13 marks to discuss that part of it. If you're going to look at the arguments for free trade, you have round about 13 marks to work with on that section. Right, here are some of the arguments for trade protectionism. That means the reasons why the government should intervene in the normal import and exporting of goods and services to try and, for instance, protect local industries. So I have taken a few of these. Don't discuss too many arguments for trade protectionism. As I said, it's only for 13 marks, so I would say take round about 5 facts where you write 1 sentence. Then you could elaborate on that fact, and where possible you can write an example. Some of the main arguments for trade protectionism: raising revenue for the government. The reason why they mention that is if companies import products from overseas, they usually pay custom duties, and that is a form of income to the government. The second point, protecting the whole industrial base. In other words, if you charge extra tariffs on products that are imported, you are going to discourage certain people from purchasing those imported products. So you want them to rather support local industries, because local industries pay taxes to the government and it creates job opportunities. So I'm going to underline a few of the most important points here. If a country has high levels of unemployment, then it would be a good thing to try and protect their local industries. When there's high levels of unemployment and the industries are protected, usually the opportunity would be there to create job opportunities. So it's very important because it protects the workers. I'm just going through and identifying main points that you could elaborate on. You could look at one of these points, write a bit more detail on it, or you could look at more main points and just write small bits of information on it. Diversifying the industrial base. If you continue to import products from overseas countries, the local industries become lazy to produce their own products. But if there's no import of certain products, the local industries are actually forced to start producing these products. And that is to the benefit of everyone in the country. I'm going to underline another fact here. A country relying too heavily on the export of one or a few products is very, very vulnerable. That means that should we focus on the production of maize and we export only maize, we could get into a situation where something goes wrong in that industry and then we have nothing else to fall back on. Let's say we have bad weather and the crops are bad and we can't export as much, then we don't have anything else to receive an income from. Another example, industries such as the iron and steel, agriculture, chemicals and energy are regarded as strategic industries. So any industry that is seen as strategic means it is important for economic growth to take place. If you rely on other countries for the production of steel and you get in a situation of war, you might not have access to those products because there will be sanctions and boycotts against a country, and then you don't have access to that. A few more reasons, arguments for trade protectionism would be, as I said already, raising the revenue for the government, protecting the whole industrial base. In other words, you protect the industries. When you protect the industries, you protect job opportunities. And some industries find it very difficult to compete with overseas companies because very often overseas companies will come and dump their products where they have surpluses in your country and they sell it at such low prices that the local industries cannot compete and they actually go out of business. Point 4, very important, if you continue to import products, that means that you create an increased demand for the currency of that country that you are importing from, because you have to pay them in their currency. And that could have an effect on the value of your own currency. If you can stimulate exports, countries who export or import from our country will have to pay us in our currency, and that leads to an increase in the demand for our currency, and it also makes our currency then stronger. So therefore, point 4 says stabilizing exchange rate and the balance of payment. The balance of payment, as we mentioned earlier, is a record of all the transactions between a country and the rest of the world. In other words, all the imports and all the exports. The reason why the government pays attention to the level of imports and exports in the country is every import that we make to this country leads to an outflow of money. So we import the product, the money goes to an overseas country. The moment that we export a product, money flows into the country. The whole idea with the balance of payment is to determine whether we import or export more of a specific product. If our imports are higher than our exports, then we are going to sit with a deficit on the balance of payment account. So the whole idea is to promote exports and to reduce imports to such an extent that you have a surplus on your balance of payment account. 6, protecting domestic standards. That refers to health and safety measures in a country and the laws that are implemented in a country, and the moment that there is trade between countries, then that becomes a difficult issue. You try to export some of your products to other countries, and you have to make sure that you meet the standards of that country. I want us to move on to the arguments against a policy of free trade. So why should we discourage free trade? Why is free trade not such a good idea? Free trade creates unemployment. Because we import products from other countries, we rely less on our local industries to provide certain products. And when there's a reduction in unemployment, sorry for that, when there's an increase in unemployment, there's also a reduction in wages because there's such an oversupply of labor that the businesses can negotiate with the employees and actually pay them lower wages. Another problem with free trade is the concentration of wealth. That means certain countries that have very strong industries can benefit so much from free trade that the developing countries really struggle. They struggle because they cannot compete with international businesses, multinational companies. Point 3, the creation of trade dependencies. That means a country relies so much on the imports of certain products from other countries that when they end up in a situation of war, they cannot look after themselves. They don't have access to certain strategic products. It creates balance of payment problems. As we said, if you import too much, you get a situation where there is a deficit on the balance of payment. Number 5, technical obstacles. That refers to certain laws and regulations in different countries and how you have to make sure that you meet the regulations of the country. And sometimes companies get into huge trouble because they transgress the laws of those countries. Point 6, damage to the environment. Because of globalization and the increase in international trade, multinational companies have branches in so many different countries and they don't always take care of the environment. And because they are developed countries and they have all the power and they sometimes create a few job opportunities in a country, they feel that they can do as they please. And this might lead to damage to the environment. Point 7, cultural diversity is undermined. Each country has a certain culture and certain traditions. But as a result of international trade and globalization, there has been such a mix-up of traditions and people are not actually sure exactly what their culture is all about because they are exposed to so many different cultures over a period of time that they actually lose a sense of their own culture. Point 8, foreign companies can sue the government for losses. It is very important when you trade internationally that you are aware of all the laws of different countries, health and safety regulations, etc. Because if you are not aware of it and you should break any of those laws, it could lead to huge losses for your business as the governments can sue, as the companies can sue another country. Now, we're now moving on to the second part or the additional part for 10 marks. Explain if South Africa has been successful in promoting free trade. In your answer, refer to various trade protocols South Africa have entered into in support of free trade. Take note that it's a maximum of 10 facts. Usually it's 2 marks for each fact, so I wouldn't write more than 5 or 6 facts on this section. And what we have done here, remember the first part of the question actually says, has South Africa been successful? So you have to say, yes, South Africa has been successful, or they haven't been successful, and then you have to motivate your answer. If your answer is a positive and you say South Africa is very successful in promoting free trade, you should get 2 marks for that. What you can then do is choose 2 or 3 protocols and write 1 sentence to explain what this trade protocol is about. So I'm just going to mention a few of them. These trade protocols include the Southern African Custom Union, the Southern African Development Community, the African Union, Mercosur, the free trade agreement with the European Union, and then there's a trade agreement with the United States, AGOA. And you can also mention the BRICS agreement and make sure that you know the countries involved there: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And you just write one short sentence to explain what this agreement is all about. Don't forget, when you answer or when you finish your essay, that you have to end with a conclusion, because this will be worth another 2 marks. And this is an example of a possible conclusion that you could write. The South African government is successful in implementing a desirable mix of protectionism and free trade. In other words, you have come to the conclusion that they have been successful. You do feel that in some cases industries are protected, but that there should also be a certain level of freedom for countries to trade, because free trade allows us access to different products, and it increases the standard of living of the people in the country. And this brings us to the end of section C.